Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Haley Meisen, and I'll be your host for today's event. Before we get started, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. First, if possible, we ask that you please turn your video on so we can see your faces and get to know you throughout our event today. Second, we do ask that you remain muted using the mute button on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. But that does not mean we do not want your questions and participations today. So as you think of questions, go ahead and put those in the chat button on the bottom of your screen, and those will be sent directly to our team so we can answer those in the live Q&A at the end of our event. Today we'll be covering a bunch of tips and advice for virtual events, especially for the upcoming fall recruiting season. We know this is a hot topic right now, so while we're giving you great advice and tips, we also want to have some fun with today's event. So we'll be theming this event in a newscast style. So I'm excited to reintroduce you to Live from the Keyot Café News Edition. Our first guest star will be Sean Anderson, recruiter at Keyot Crew 212 for the past 2 years, talking with us about upcoming recruiting trends. Welcome to the show, Sean.
Thanks for having me, Haley.
Perfect. To get us kick-started, Sean, what are some trends you're seeing with the fall recruiting season?
Great question. So one trend that many of us are aware of, and that some have really already experienced themselves, is limited on-campus employer interactions. So this means networking, career fairs, and interviewing will all take place in a virtual environment. So it's really important to get comfortable with virtual platforms such as Handshake and LinkedIn.
And why is it so important to make time to attend these virtual events?
Absolutely. Well, first off, it's important to make time for virtual events because there really won't likely be those in-person opportunities. Employers will be making many hiring decisions without that face-to-face contact. Also, virtual events present opportunities to build your knowledge, meet new people, and stay connected with your existing network. Lastly, they are also cost-effective and are not limited to a geographic location.
Following up to that, where can I find virtual events to participate in?
Great question. So there's a ton of platforms out there. I would highly recommend Handshake, as it's one of the largest and growing platforms for students and universities. There's over 600 virtual fairs on Handshake going into this fall season as well. I'd also recommend LinkedIn and would encourage you all to follow prospective employers' pages to find their virtual events. Some of you may have even found the Keyot Café event this way. I'd also recommend that you leverage Career First Services because they have a lot of great expertise and are always willing to share their wisdom. And then lastly, I'd recommend checking out the Career Fair Plus and Career Eco platforms, which are 2 newer virtual career fair platforms that will be used by many universities this fall.
You touched on this a little bit, Sean, but most of this fall will be all virtual career fairs. Do you have any specific tips for attending a virtual career fair?
Absolutely. So one thing I would definitely want to focus on is make sure your profile is up to date for each of those platforms and that it reflects your relevant and recent experience and skill set. Also have your electronic resume handy, as you may need to reference it or clarify points that employers or virtual events may ask about. I'd also research all the companies that you want to visit beforehand and have some research done and questions prepared. And lastly, practice your elevator pitch and truly master it. Be able to speak to your coursework, internship experience, and leadership roles clearly.
Well, thank you for joining our show today, Sean. Before we let you go, do you have any last advice for preparing for virtual events?
My last piece of advice is to stay patient and understand that this format is new for both students and employers. So there will likely be those technical difficulties or awkward moments, but don't let those discourage you.
All righty, well, thank you for giving your time and wisdom with us today, Sean. Our next guest star is Courtney Clark, senior recruiter at Keyot, who in her own right might be considered a fashion expert when we're talking about virtual appearance. Welcome, Courtney.
Thanks, Haley. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. As you've probably heard hundreds of times before, it's always great to make your first impressions. You only get your first impressions. And given the current market and current environment, first impressions are even more important during this time. Although you're virtual, still super important. And one of my favorite ways to make a great first impression is starting in your closet. Virtual events come in many shapes and sizes. It could be a professional development event, a networking group, maybe meetup. Now you have career fair season coming up that's likely going to be virtual interviews as well. Each event can bring a different flavor of professionalism, and it's important to know how to kind of navigate those environments. I will share some tips on how to make a great first impression in the virtual world. But to share that some of these tips mirror some of the advice that you were kind of given in more of an in-person setting with business casual versus business professional. Some of that stuff is the same. And we want to make sure that it brings kind of a different flavor in a virtual
Courtney,
world.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. But as in our virtual world and virtual events we're talking about today, we're having a really hard time hearing you. Do you mind checking in on your internet connection, and we can come back to your segment here in a few minutes? All right, perfect. We will come back to your segment here after our next guest star. All right, well, thank you all for your patience. Like I said, virtual events, this is what can happen. And that's actually a great introduction into our next guest star, who is Bonnie Baldus. She is a corporate trainer who recently dived in to the world of virtual training. So welcome, Bonnie.
Thank you, Haley. So yes, this is all new to all of us, and it's going to have its challenges. And so as Sean pointed out, please do be patient. The last thing that we want to do is let technology get in the way of a great impression, but don't let it stress you out too much. One of the things that you can do before you even log on, before you're at the virtual event, just go out to the website of the platform or the tool that you're going to be using and look around. Most of those tools have demos on their websites, and it's nothing that you need to pay for. It's nothing that you need to sign up for, but go out there and gain some familiarity by watching some of those videos. Most of the options that are being used today, like Zoom and WebEx and even GoToMeeting, are very intuitive, but you want to make sure that you shine through. And so just to kind of put your stress about the technology itself to rest, just do that in advance. It's going to help you out a lot. With technology, it's also all about testing, and it's not just the platform or the tool that you'll be using. You want to make sure that you can log in. Sometimes you'll be able to give that a test drive, so do that a day or two prior to the event. That way, if you struggle, you can contact the event coordinator and ask them for some advice. Many tools will offer you the ability to download a desktop client access tool, or if you're going to use a device such as your phone, you can download an app. Do that ahead of time, and that way when it's time to log into your virtual event, then it will be much more smooth and much quicker. Now, if you have access to the web portal, usually there's just a button you click, such as what we used today, and boom, you should be on. But make sure that you understand what's going on with that, and make sure that you use the best access points that you can. For example, sometimes those phone apps will have less functionality than perhaps the desktop client or the web portal. So figure out what your event coordinator recommends, make that happen. While you're doing testing, also make sure that your audio and your video work. So when it comes to audio, for example, you want to make sure that your speakers both obtain sound from you and they convey sound to you. So some of you may have noticed that my husband stepped in earlier when Haley was going through introductions, and that's because my sound speakers weren't working. So we make sure that you do some sort of a sound check, and many tools will allow you to do that. So they'll convey that on there, and just do that test. Next, let's talk about headphones. Sometimes we are going to be using a phone to join, but we are using the desktop, for example, for the video. If you do that, then you may need to sync your headphones and your phone to your log on to the platform itself. That way it doesn't look like there's two of you, all right? And if you're using headphones, test those too. When I use headphones, sometimes I get mixed up with all of the buttons. There's the on-off button, there's the connect button, there's the mute button, and I can't tell you how many times I've intended to mute myself and I have totally shut off the phone call. So test that, make sure that you're familiar, because when they're on your head, you can't see those buttons, okay? Now, let's talk Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi connections can be a huge challenge, and especially with everybody staying home these days, you've got a lot of people who are probably drawing on your internet connection. So one of the things you want to do to test your Wi-Fi connection is a day or two in advance, preferably during the time your event is going to be taking place. So let's say your interview is at 2 p.m. At 2 p.m. a day or two before your interview, you want to sign on and figure out how is that Wi-Fi during that time. You might find out, for example, that your little brother's playing Fortnite. You've got your little sister who that's her time to watch cat videos, and that's also grandma's time to, you know, binge on Netflix, Orange is the New Black. So make sure, all right, that you've got a clear space during that time. And if they're all on, this is your opportunity to use negotiating, bribery, whatever it takes to have them find something else while you're on that interview, all right? When it is time to log on to the virtual event, make sure that your device or your laptop is fully charged, all right, or you have a charger close at hand. And on that desktop and on that phone, close out of all other applications. Just close them out. There's a couple of reasons for this, all right? First, it's going to ensure that your laptop or your device is at its top performance, and it's going to perform as well as possible. It's also going to reduce the chance that you are tempted to click away from your virtual event. So just get rid of that temptation, all right? Set that stuff aside by closing down the applications. So a couple things to note. The more things you have open on your desktop, the more likely you are to actually lose your virtual event screen and all the other things that you have going on. So just make sure that you know that's not going to happen, because if it does and you're panicking, you can't find where you're supposed to be, it's not cool. If you wear glasses, keep in mind that oftentimes people can see what you're looking at in the reflection of your lenses. And the last thing that you want is a potential employer to be noticing that you too are watching cat videos while you're supposed to be interviewing or participating in a job fair. So be careful of that. Another thing that sometimes surprises people is that virtual event platforms actually will let the moderator know when a participant has clicked away from the event platform into a different application. Comes up with a little red exclamation point, and what that does is it tells the moderator that you have stepped away and you're no longer paying attention. Now, sometimes we say, oh, but that's multitasking. That shows that I can multitask. It's not multitasking. It's multi-ignoring. So don't do that. Stay focused. You wouldn't do it face to face, all right? Now, you've got a lot of technology going on. What do we do about engaging? Use eye contact. What that means is that you want to look at that little white light, which indicates that is the lens or the camera lens of your device. So do that, and then you are maintaining eye contact. Then you're going to glance quickly away at whoever you're speaking to read and gauge their facial expressions, all right? So you always want to make sure that it's kind of a multitasking thing, all right? But don't do it multi-ignoring. Do take notes, all right? Sometimes it's good to keep a pad and a pen handy, all right? And you can look down and you can let people know I'm taking notes, all right? And that shows that you are paying attention, all right? Now, mute. In one-on-one conversations, don't mute unless they specifically ask you to, or unless the dog starts to bark or, you know, chaos ensues. In a one-on-many conversation, it is a good idea to mute unless they tell you otherwise, all right? So that's how to do that. And little trick is that your space bar actually, if you're on mute, you can push the space bar and hold it down and it unmutes you. Let's say you had to answer a question, all right? And then when you lift up on that space bar, it remutes you. So that's just a way that you can do that without trying to search for that mute button all over your screen. So there are times when you have tested, you've closed out your applications, you've done all these things you're supposed to do, but yet still technology turns against you. It's going to happen, all right? Take a breath, all right, and stay calm. So first, getting frustrated only makes it worse. And it might not even be you or your technology. It may actually be the platform or the event itself, right? So just maintain a degree of dignity and calmness. If you are, for example, using Zoom and your name is not listed correctly under your video image, you can change it by clicking on the little dots beside your name, all right? And you just call up that rename function. So that's easy. However, sometimes the event moderator may have the tag, all right, or the filter set so that you can't do that yourself. And if that's the case, use the chat function and say, hey, moderator, can you change my name too? All right, so easy peasy, take care of that. Some other things to keep in mind when it comes to technology issues or frustrations. Usually at the beginning of an event, the coordinator will post a phone number or an email for participants to use in the case specifically of technology difficulties. So if you can't settle it, use that number, use that email. If you're still connected, but you're having difficulties, you can also let the moderator know using the chat function. So simply say, hey, I'm having a little bit of difficulty with my audio or whatever that happens to be. Let them know I'm working on it. In the end of all ends, you may simply have to close down, take a breath, resolve your issue, and then sign back on. And if you can, in the chat, let the moderator know that that's what you're doing. Okay, so it happens to everybody, all right? And check your connection. It may have simply burped and you might not be connected, all right? So just some quick things that you can keep in mind. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is virtual backgrounds, all right? So what do we do when our background maybe isn't as professional as we would like it to be, all right? So maybe we're sitting in the basement, we've got exposed beams, hanging wires, whatever that happens to be. You may opt for using a virtual background, all right? And for example, in Zoom, you simply go over to your video button and you can choose a different virtual background, all right? So easy peasy, it's not too difficult, but you want to do that before your event starts because the last thing you want to look like you're doing is running around the world, all right, changing your video background because you think it looks kind of cool, okay? So what I would like to do at this point in time, Carly, if you can help us out, is we're going to open a poll and we're going to get your feedback on virtual backgrounds. So notice that there are some poll questions up there. Just click your answers and submit. And then when those are all in, Carly will show us the results. Do we have the results, Carly? There we go. All right, so we've got the majority of us that think it's professional. Some of us say it's unprofessional. We'll talk a little bit about that, all right? And I love the fact that 7% of you think it's an opportunity not to clean your space. Your mother would be proud. Keep in mind that there are different ways that people perceive a virtual background. And so one of the things you have to ask yourself is, what am I attempting to convey by using a virtual background? All right, so some things to ask yourself. First and foremost, is it professional? So for example, with my case here, I've got the bookcase. Is it a little bit distracting? All right, so what does it say when you're sitting in front of the Aurora Borealis and it looks like the world is kind of in flux, okay? So if it's distracting, you probably don't want to do it, Okay. You want to also ask, why do you need it? Am I doing this so that I can promote my brand? All right. So you may have a professional background and it's got the logo of your company or your college if you would like to do that. All right. Something like that. So those are things to consider. All right. Keep in mind, you have to also ask, does it actually add any value whatsoever? All right. And what does it say about me? Okay. So ask yourself those kinds of things. And last, and by all means, all right, keep in mind you're in an interview, you're in a career fair, you want to ask, does it promote my professional image? All right. So what does this say about you? All right. And therefore, how are you going to deal with it? Okay. So later on, you guys can ask me any questions that you would like. Right now, I'm going to ask Haley to move us to a new segment, and I'm going to go off to the beach. Thanks, guys.
Well, thank you, Bonnie. I wish you could join you there on that beautiful beach. And with that, let's go ahead and check back in with Courtney Clark. Hi, Courtney.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully you guys can hear me a little bit better now. Technology, perfect, wonderful. Well, I appreciate your patience. As everyone has kind of mentioned, technology can be our friend and can be a little bit challenging at times when we need it the most. But jumping back into kind of your virtual appearance and even your professional appearance during this time, I have a couple of different segments to kind of walk through, starting with what do I even wear? So looking back and kind of thinking, if you're attending a professional development event, maybe it's a meetup group or a networking group, I would say it's probably okay to wear more business casual attire. A suit jacket is appropriate, but it's not necessarily required to have a tie, during that time. For females, a blouse is generally all right as well. But what about an interview and a career fair? Again, bringing out that more business professional attire is certainly appropriate during this time as well. Again, these same tips and tricks have been mirrored during your conversations, maybe with career professionals, for the more in-person settings as well. One thing, I know we're all virtual. I know we're only looking at kind of the top half of our body. It is important to also prepare for the bottom half. In the event your furry friend comes in, they start barking and you have to get up and go take care of that. They don't want to see your gym shorts or whatever else you're wearing down there. So make sure you include all halves of your body. Now let's move on to kind of that color palette. As you all know, we're sitting at a screen all day. We're looking through things in a virtual lens. That can cause a lot of strain on individuals' eyes. I know for myself, for example, having glasses, it does do that. I always say and recommend stick with a fairly neutral color palette when you're looking at kind of dressing for success. Avoiding bright colors or loud patterns is super important. Again, that can cause strain or can cause a glare on somebody's computer. Stick with the grays, navies, whites, blacks, or tans during this time. Those are excellent color palettes to stay within. Finally, as everyone has kind of mentioned already, fashion is important, but your virtual presence is just as important. So my first piece of advice is control what you can control. Everyone is in the same boat you in. We're all living, working, and interviewing in the same space, and we're not so much used to that. So be cognizant of kind of what's going around you and control what you can control, and maybe tidy up that room that you're sitting in. I recommend finding a quiet space in whatever environment you're in. Have your computer, cell phone, or tablet sit where the camera is pointing generally from your shoulders up. Depending on your environment as well, kind of make your bed, maybe close your closet doors or remove any personal inappropriate items from view. So when looking at kind of what do I wear, what color should I kind of focus on, and ensuring that your environment around you is ready for success, kind of take those tips and tricks into consideration. Again, following what you may have learned in more of an in-person setting. Now we're just doing it via technology.
Well, thank you, Courtney. We look forward to hearing more from you later on your virtual etiquette. But for now, we're going to welcome back Sean Anderson to walk us through a virtual appearance activity.
Excellent. Thank you, Haley. So at this time, I'm going to share my screen and give you all a look at an example of an ineffective background. All right, so here is an example of an ineffective background for virtual events. And based off of some of Courtney's advice, we're going to pick apart this image and talk a little bit more about how you could improve this background. So one of the things Courtney addressed was loud and vibrant attire. So As you can see, I'm wearing a very bright orange pullover with a messy collar. And this can definitely distract the audience and can provide that glare on other people's computers. I'm also wearing a bright blue hat with a big branded logo. This also can be distracting and covers a large portion of my face, along with the sunglasses. So glasses are all right if you need them to see accurately, but sunglasses are something you can definitely avoid, especially when inside. This prevents other audience members from seeing my facial expressions and my eye contact, which is extremely important for those virtual events. Also, as you can see in the background, I hope your bedroom is not as messy as this, but if you do have suitcases, loose belongings, and cords across the floor, please be sure that you're picking those up, putting them into a closet door, and shutting that door. If you do have any beds in the background, make sure they're made and presentable. Also, to Courtney's point, you can't control everything. Sometimes you may have roommates, pets, other individuals that may be living in the same space or using the same space as you. So make sure you're giving them a heads up that you'll be in that virtual environment so your brother's foot doesn't show up on the right side like it did in this picture. You want to avoid that at all possible. But thank you for that. At this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and kind of bring it back to a more presentable virtual background. So here we are. We're back in the same place. It's the same person. It's still me. Now I have a better collar on, a neutral shirt. The belongings have been picked up from the floor and the doors have been shut. So who would you want to hire? The same room, same person, but two very different backgrounds. Back to you, Haley.
All right, thank you, Sean. I now would like to welcome back Courtney Clark for a live interview on the virtual etiquette and what we can expect when we're in these events. So Courtney, to kick us off, just what are some best practices for participating in a virtual event?
Absolutely. I think number one thing that I always recommended is kind of keeping yourself muted when you're not speaking. Although Bonnie had mentioned during a one-on-one setting, you don't necessarily have to keep yourself muted during that time. I know personally with my audio and video capabilities, they pick up every sound that comes, whether I'm clicking a pen or readjusting my chair. So I tend to personally keep myself muted and quickly try to put something or my mouse pointed directly on the mute button or my finger very close to the mute button on my phone. Turn on your video when you are able to, or if you have that capability. Being in a networking session or maybe professional development, and especially an interview, that's a great way to interact with individuals during that session as well. One of my favorite things within this virtual event, because I'm naturally an introvert myself, so if I physically go somewhere, I'm not always accustomed to just going up and interacting with people. Using the chat feature during a networking event or professional development event is a great feature to use to just interact. I've found some great dialogue happens if you were to join something, maybe it was a professional development event and all of the attendees sit nationally to just type in, "Hi, this is Courtney Clark from Iowa." Generally the moderator will acknowledge you, and then it's creating that great dialogue and building some good connections that way. Finally, kind of evaluate your atmosphere, really kind of figure out, and I always kind of recommend, unfortunately this failed me today, so maybe take this advice with a grain of salt. Confirm that the interviewer can hear you okay. Personally, I recommend using the dial-in option versus internet audio, excuse me. Because if your internet does go out, they can still hear you. Your picture just may be frozen.
So Courtney, this next question is kind of an age-old one. When should you log on to a virtual event, and what should you do if you log on early?
Absolutely. So I always kind of recommend logging on about 3 to 5 minutes early, but don't log on too early. Fun fact, meeting organizers can see when participants do log on. Generally, if it's more of a one-on-one setting, they can see the one person. If there's multiple people, they'll see the first person that logs on. As a recruiter using Zoom or Ring Central, quite predominantly during these interview times, it is nice to see somebody's going in and kind of testing those capabilities, making sure they're getting logged in on time just before that. It's a great way for you to test out that audio, figure out what looks good from a visual perspective and things of that nature. In terms of kind of how should I introduce myself, when should I introduce myself, should I even do it type thing. Again, really think of that atmosphere. If it's more of a one-on-one interview or maybe a smaller group, think about under 25 people, I always recommend always introducing yourself verbally. Say, hey, this is Courtney Clark. I'm from Keyot, for example. In larger networking events, like I'd mentioned previously, maybe do it in the chat feature. Sometimes there's dialogue that's happening. Sometimes people introduce themselves. I think it's a great way to start that dialogue within the chat feature by just introducing yourself that way.
Well, Courtney, I know you have an adorable little dog there at home with you, but what do you do if your pet, roommate, or family member interrupts you during a virtual event?
Absolutely, I do. And having my furry coworker here with me all the time is super beneficial, but she does have some barking fits sometimes when the wonderful Amazon Prime comes in from shopping too much online. But first and foremost, I always recommend mute yourself first, then go and kind of disable your video. When you're able to kind of gather your thoughts and get ready, collected back and ready to come back into the picture, you can turn on your video and then unmute yourself. One of the examples I have is I was in a professional development event a couple of weeks ago, and a participant actually had someone come in during the middle of the presentation, and they were giving each other a hug, whether the person was leaving or whatever. And it kind of caused a little bit of a disruption in the flow of the event. And she also forgot to mute herself. So then it was this big pause of people trying to figure out who was talking and kind of what to do next. So it's always best to just mute yourself first because that audio can disrupt things, and then turn off that video as well.
Especially as an interviewer for a career fair, how can I come across professionally in this virtual environment?
Absolutely. Number one, and I'm sure you guys have heard this a million times because it is consistent with being in person, think of your body language, Appear attentive and make that eye contact. Like Bonnie had mentioned, look at that little white dot when you're looking at the camera. Interviewers will notice slouching or multitasking. I myself wear glasses, so I have to be cognizant of kind of what I'm looking at. I've also noticed with individuals who don't wear glasses, you can see their eyes moving along the screen, so people can notice that stuff. I know blue light glasses are fantastic, especially when we're in this virtual world and we're constantly staring at a computer screen. They are very predominant in being able to see what you're looking at outside of normal glasses, so just be cognizant of that as well. Come prepared, have everything in front of you, whether it's a notebook, pen, paper, things of that nature. I always recommend having a bottle of water with you. You can be talking pretty frequently, so make sure you're able to grab that quickly and have questions and come engaged. I recommend that although you are in a virtual setting and it's easy to hide behind that computer screen or that audio, come with questions, show that engagement. It is a super competitive market. There's a lot of people looking for opportunities, and you really need to stick out and put your best foot forward.
I logged on early. I followed your tips being professional during the event, but now it's time for the event to end. How should I leave?
Absolutely. So for larger events, it is generally a little bit more tricky. So about 25 people or more, I recommend that it's appropriate to just type in the chat feature to express your gratitude for attending. Say, hey, thanks so much for your time. Things of that nature, you can drop in your contact information, what have you. For smaller events, I think that is a more appropriate time for you to express your gratitude verbally. Again, you could use that chat feature, but having that voice-to-voice communication, more smaller, intimate gatherings allow you to have a little bit more of that dialogue.
Our last question for you today, Courtney, is should I follow up after a virtual event?
I do think so. So although you are virtual, like I mentioned, it is a great time for you to connect with people who are joining those same events, whether it's an interview, professional development, things of that nature. As luck may have it, you're all joining the same thing. So you do have a common connection between that you could use in a LinkedIn message kind of back and forth with each other. The beauty of all of this, and as a recruiter, you have a list right in front of you of everyone's names. You don't have to sit and remember someone's name tag or have a bunch of business cards coming at you. So you're able to kind of look through that list in the participants feature of any platform that you're using and connect with people right there. And now you all have a common connection going forward. So I do recommend that.
Well, thank you, Courtney. And thank you to all of our guest stars who appeared on today's show. That is a wrap on today's news segment. So now we'd like to turn it over to our audience. At this time, put any questions that you have in that chat button below, and then we'll field those questions out to our panelists today to get those answers for you. It looks like our first question is already rolling in, and it is, what is a good way to create an elevator pitch that doesn't feel like a spiel and is still engaging to the recruiter?
So I think an effective elevator pitch has a lot of factors that go into it. One thing that I would have a big focus on is understanding what you've gained from your coursework and be able to speak clearly and concisely to how you've applied what you've learned to a specific opportunity. So whether it's an internship, a job, or a leadership opportunity, really be able to speak to how you've applied what you've learned.
If I could add on to that, Haley, I would say my biggest piece of advice for elevator pitches is don't script it out. So don't write it out fully. Come with talking points. From an elevator pitch and getting to know candidates early on, I really just want to know about not only what they've done, but what's their personality like. You can learn a lot by somebody in the first 30 seconds of how are they presenting themselves. So come with bullet points, know what you kind of want to talk about, but also know your elevator pitch is not going to be the same in every interaction.
As we talked about, virtual is a new world, and not everyone is fortunate enough to have a home office to work out of. Where are some other locations you recommend working from?
I have seen candidates sit in their bedrooms, which I think is completely fine. Again, everyone's in the same situation. Not everyone is able to have a home office within wherever their environment is. I've seen people sit on the patio if it's a nice day. I've seen individuals sit in their living room as well. Maybe it's at their coffee table, just kind of typing away and things of that nature. I always recommend just having a sturdy foundation rather than maybe having your laptop in your lap. So you can sit there and you have, or whatever device you're using for that. So I've seen a variety of different settings that people have kind of sat in. I would probably avoid large coffee shops just because, again, you can connect some of that audio from the people around you.
Building off of what Courtney said, I know when I was a student, there was a number of rooms that were available to be rented, whether it was at the library, the business school, or career services, for example. So using your school's portal to log time with those rooms is a great way to plan ahead and to have a space that's going to have stable Wi-Fi, a quiet room with a door that you're usually able to shut. I know that may look and feel a little bit different during quarantine and COVID. I'm not sure what all of the availability is for those rooms, but I would recommend checking those out if you have the opportunity.
And I'm going to build off of that. Some public libraries also have small breakout rooms, and they usually have fairly good internet too.
And if I could tack on today, I'm actually sitting in my bedroom at a folding table in front of my bed. So you can always find a place to sit and a good place to work, even if it's maybe not the most ideal. I definitely miss my office. I can tell you that. Our next question, Bonnie, I'm going to direct this at you. Do you think it's appropriate to use virtual backgrounds for networking events and interviews?
Well, again, the virtual background, run through those questions and really ask yourself, what am I trying to convey? And it comes down to a level of authenticity. So when you use virtual backgrounds, usually people can tell that you're using it. And so it just becomes a matter of what do you want to say to people. And so I would say that, you know, if that virtual background is actually going to help promote your own brand, your own personal brand, and your level of credibility, then by all means, go ahead and do that. But people like to have a little bit of insight into who you are anyway. And as Courtney pointed out, if your bedroom is neat, all right, then what does that convey? It says that I have found the best place in my home, and it is neat and it is tidy and it's quiet so that I can pay attention to you. So
I think that's a great point, Bonnie. If you do have a space that you're confident and proud to present, use it to your advantage, right? Show potential employers or other individuals that you took the time to prepare. You found the right lighting, the right background that's going to be most effective.
exactly. And if you watch any of the news, oftentimes you'll find even those newscasters or people that they're interviewing might be sitting at the island in their kitchen, but their kitchen is all cleaned up and it's tidy, and you know, it's okay.
Sean mentioned earlier that you might need to go outside of your house, maybe to a room on campus. If you do need to go to a library to attend a virtual session or another place, how does wearing a mask impact your virtual presence? Is this something that should be avoided?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if I have the answer or the solution right now. I think if possible, removing a face mask is the route I would suggest because those facial expressions are very important, especially when in an interview setting. Now, obviously, safety comes first. So if you're unable to be in an environment where you are able to take a mask off, your health and your safety is going to come first, in my opinion.
And oftentimes, all you have to do too is let the person that you're speaking to say, I'm right now in a public library and I'm unable to social distance 6 feet. So if you don't mind, I'm going to, keep my mask on.
I also know this is kind of a funny story, but I had somebody that was wearing a mask. They were in a public setting. I know this isn't the super cool thing anymore, but they had headphones with cords. And so they stuck the cord with the microphone in their mask and then it came down. So then it was closer to their mouth and there wasn't that blockage there. So just know that that's an option as well.
Great advice, Courtney.
I have not heard that before. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
This next question is actually specifically for you, Courtney. In an event like this one that we're in right now, how do you decide whether to follow up with all the hosts or just a few of the hosts?
I think that's really up to your discretion. I'm a firm believer that you should follow up with whoever you feel the most comfortable with following up with and creating that good dialogue. I also think that it should be about kind of where they're working and kind of who they're supporting as well. I know, for example, Haley and Sean and Bonnie and Renee work on more of the Crew 212 side of things, so with fresh college graduates. I work on more of the senior side of consulting. So I would likely, if I was to connect with you, probably push you to Sean or Haley in that event. So kind of knowing where people may fall. Again, I know that's super hard, but using that to your discretion. But at the same time, that doesn't mean you shouldn't connect with somebody because they could connect you to the right person down the road.
And building off of that, I know Courtney mentioned using those nameplates at the bottom of each Zoom screen to your advantage. You can always look up those names on LinkedIn. Not during the event, you don't want to be multi-ignoring, to Bonnie's point, but you can use those names to find their titles and maybe direct your efforts on who to reach out to best that way.
Our next question is, what are some specific tips for a virtual interview?
This is going to sound very canned, and I know it will, but I want people, when I'm talking to them, to ignore the fact that I'm talking to a computer, essentially, and I'm just seeing them. So keep it very natural. Don't make shed light on the fact that you are virtual. Make it feel like you guys are in person together. Show that personality and feel comfortable doing it. Again, like we have kind of reiterated multiple times, everyone's in the same boat, right? Everyone has the same technology changes, technology challenges that we're having. You know, some people here in Iowa have lost internet over the last couple of days and electricity. So we're all in this together type thing. So feel comfortable. Don't feel like it's like, oh, I don't know what to do. This is challenging, things of that nature. It is a normal interview. Everyone's a normal human being. We're trying to keep things as normal as possible. So go in it with that kind of mentality.
Definitely. I'd also add that we're all new to this virtual world, and sometimes with the audio, the give and take has a delay, and you'll often find that you'll be interrupting people on complete accident, and it's gonna happen. It happens to us all the time. I've done it myself. So sometimes just getting out and practicing having conversations, even with one other individual, and practicing that cadence and practicing some of that delay would also kind of benefit the flow of your conversation come the day of the actual interview.
One of the things that I like to do too is, especially if I have the luxury of speaking one-on-one, or maybe I'm only speaking to 2 people at a time, taking their pictures, right, and sliding those up just underneath my camera, that camera light. And that way I can see their faces, but I feel like I'm making better eye contact with them, and it starts to come a lot more naturally.
Is there anything you would add to that advice or change for a virtual group interview?
One thing that I've personally done myself, granted it was not in a virtual setting, but early on when I was interviewing, to kickstart my journey with Keyot, actually. It's kind of hard in person, even in group interviews, to know who's going to kind of talk next, or things of that nature. I've done this during presentations and things like that. Is when you're getting ready to talk, kind of lean forward a little bit, or get closer to the camera, or get closer to whoever you're speaking to, because that signifies to the other individuals, if you kind of make it known within the team that that is your signal to whoever's going to talk, that that's what you're doing. We've done that in meetings here at Keyot ourselves, is whoever gets closer is the one that's going to talk. You can likely tell that way.
Something that all of you have mentioned in our questions today is that it's unavoidable. You're going to talk over someone else. It's going to happen. What do you do in that situation? And if it does happen, how do you act?
The last thing you want to do is get into a chip and dale where, oh, you go first. No, you go first. No, you go first. No, you go first. So if someone is polite enough to say, I apologize, you can go ahead, then go ahead and do that. So if they give you permission, jump on that. At the same time, you can also be the first one to say, I apologize for talking over. You go first. You know, so once somebody gives you permission to do that, let's move the conversation along.
I would echo the same thing. I'll typically say, go ahead, or I'll just stop talking myself and let them continue.
I'll add to this too right now, like for our presenters who are talking, I'm watching their microphones because, for example, Bonnie unmutes herself a few seconds before she wants to talk, and that lets me know that somebody else wants to speak. So by keeping an eye on that in a group discussion, that can help you as well. Our next question is really a good follow-up to the last one. When you're in a networking event, how do you strike the balance between standing out and showing out who you are and excessively dominating the conversation?
I can take this one. I think it's easy in a group setting to sometimes be the domineering person that's talking a lot, especially if you're the expert or have a lot of knowledge in that area. But one way to show potential employers or other individuals that you're aware of this is to ask other people directly for their feedback. So once you've found yourself in a point where you think you've shared quite a bit of information and you're looking for others' input, ask them directly, hey, Haley, do you have anything to add to that? Or do you have a different point of view that you could bring to the table?
Perfect. Our next question, I'm going to go ahead and defer back to Courtney. After an event, when you're connecting with the recruiter, is it best to reach out via LinkedIn or through email directly?
I personally think either one. I mean, I wouldn't say I strongly have a preference one way or another. I think from a networking perspective, it is always good to connect with somebody via LinkedIn. People will share postings or will connect you to another person, or share a really good article. I think if you're looking for a new opportunity or wanting to just explore things professionally, LinkedIn is definitely the way to do that. But I do think that if you were to connect with somebody via LinkedIn, always add a message within there so they know why this person is connecting with them, and do the same thing with an email, and have a really great, is it a subject line? I was going to say a tagline. Subject line within there so they know why this person is reaching out and things of that nature.
This next question is kind of a fun one. I know Sean and Courtney will be excited for this one. What is the best question you've received from a candidate at the end of an interview, virtual or in person?
I got to think over the last like 700 interviews.
If you two want to think about it, there's another question here specifically for Bonnie. So we'll come back to you to hear the best question you've been asked. So Bonnie, for those of you on the call who don't know, Bonnie is kind of a corporate trainer and does a lot of trainings for a lot of different clients, but has now switched to all virtual. So we've talked about virtual events like networking and career fairs, but many people on the call today are also going into the classroom virtually this upcoming fall. What is some advice you have from a training perspective?
I would say definitely become familiar with whatever platform you're using and take advantage of all that they have to offer. So for example, the small group breakout sessions is a real opportunity for people to work on group projects, to share ideas, to collaborate. And as an instructor, I can pop in on each of those small groups and I can answer questions. And it really helps people get to know each other, and so then the ideas start to flow. I love the polling options, or to have people share thumbs up, or to point them to those little emoticons that they can actually put right on their picture to say, this is good, I like this idea, to raise their hand. The challenge though, as someone who is an instructor in that, is the overall multitasking, just to watch facial expressions, watch the chat, that kind of thing. So it takes practice. So get out there and practice with different tools. The two primary tools that I use are Zoom and WebEx. I'm highly reliant on the tools that the client would like to use. And so just gain skill with that, gain a comfort level, and it is exciting in terms of what we can do. And I think in the future, it's going to open it up to the fact that we can have people both face-to-face when the virus is over, and we can also have combined classrooms of face-to-face and virtual. And I think that will be a pretty fun and exciting thing too.
Thank you, Bonnie. All right, let's go back. Sean and Courtney, what is the best question you've gotten from a candidate at the end of an interview?
So I have two. I have one that's kind of funny and one that's probably more professional. The funny one was they asked me if I could compare Keyot to any superhero, who would it be and why? And the other one, I always really like this question because I think it shows the curiosity from candidates in the marketplace, is tell me about what you're seeing in the economy. Who's hiring the most? Where can I kind of go and put that that time and effort into, things of that nature? As a recruiter, it's my really my passion, and my role is to connect people to opportunities, whether that's through Keyot or outside of Keyot. I want you to find a great new adventure, and I want to help connect the dots as much as possible. So it shows that curiosity, it shows that initiative, and that they're really wanting to know what are things like, and where can I take my career next, type thing.
Great answer, Courtney. I love the one about the superhero. I've not had that myself. But Keyot and the Crew 212 program, we have a huge focus on continuous development and ongoing training. So when a candidate asks me about, what can I actionably do between now and the next stage of the interview process to add value to my skill set, that's a big question to me, because it shows me that they're invested with their own progression, and they're invested in our interview process, and they're actively looking for ways that they can add value to their current skill set. So I love that focus. We love anyone that's showing that they can bring that extra degree to the table.
Well, this next question is a fun one too. So get ready for this. Thank you, by the way, to our audience for all of these great questions. We really appreciate it. So the next one is, what are some instant pet peeves you have in a virtual event?
Unmade bed is definitely one for me. I know as a team, we've had this happen a few times in the past during interviews, and it's one that we kind of notice pretty much right out the gates. And it's one that I think is easily fixed as well.
For me, it's fidgeting, and we all move, we all have to adjust, and that's not what I mean, but the continual rocking back and forth, or jiggling kind of thing. Just be aware.
I think mine is, in addition to kind of the fidgeting side of things, is if you're not muting yourself and you're typing. I have long nails myself, and I know that my nails make sounds on the keyboard. And when you hear that as a moderator in a presentation or people talking outside of that, it does disrupt a lot of that flow and can be very annoying actually during that time, even as a listener during that time. So kind of make sure you're muting yourself.
Well, that wraps up all of the questions from our audience. So with that, I want to ask one last question to all of our guest stars today. What is any lingering advice that you would give someone going into a virtual event?
For me, I would say have fun with it. It's an opportunity to meet let's say it's a career fair, and it's an opportunity to meet so many different people, and oftentimes they will have a lobby area where you can go in, you can connect with other people who are there seeking careers. So it's overall, it's a great networking opportunity. I am an introvert, just like Courtney is, and so I've had so much fun with this environment because I feel like I'm a lot freer to participate with people, and I don't have anxiety attacks. So, loosen up, enjoy it. All right. Use it as an opportunity.
For me, I'd say the world has obviously changed a lot recently, and it looks like virtual is going to be the way of the world, kind of moving into the new normal. So I would say, especially for recent college graduates and students, make your mistakes now. It's okay to have technical difficulties. It's okay to not have the most effective background right now. I know I've made those mistakes and learned from them, but this is truly the time to learn and to really be the most effective in those virtual events, because they are not going away by the looks of it.
Can I build on that? And here's just something to keep in mind. A colleague of mine shared this with me, and he said, fail is just an acronym. And I said, oh, what does it stand for? And he said, first attempt in learning. So go out there, try different approaches in the virtual environment, figure out what works for you, because it's not going to work the same for everybody.
I think my number one piece of advice is, and this is probably easier said than done, is don't be nervous during this time. Like we've said, everyone's in the same boat. You don't have to worry about making sure your shoe's tied, having the right handshake. There's a lot of factors now that you don't really have to take into consideration that you will down the road when we're able to be in person. Making sure you can walk in your heels, things of that nature. You're able to be a little bit more comfortable, really express your personality during this time and get a little bit more comfortable in the environments that you're in. So don't be nervous during this time. Everyone's adjusting and trying to get through this as best we can.
Once again, I just want to say thank you to our guest stars for coming on today and sharing their time and wisdom with all of us. And thank you to all of you on the meeting today. Hopefully you can walk away from today's meeting with some good actionable tips as you head into virtual events. We do know we covered a lot today. You're probably like, I could not have written all of that down and everything we've covered. Well, we do want to help you with that as well. We'll be sending out a one-sheeter of tips for virtual events through the chat button below. So once that pops up, you can click on it and download it to your computer. You can reference it later. It looks like it just went through from Carly Johnson. So go ahead and click on that and save it. You will also notice at the bottom of that sheet that we have a fun competition we want you to participate in. So earlier in our event today, Sean showed you his unprofessional, bad virtual background, made a few simple changes, and then had a great professional background that, of course, look at him. Of course, you want to hire him or get to know him better. We want you to try the same. So our Keyot competition, take a screenshot of yourself with maybe your unprofessional background or what your current background looks like, and then send us a follow-up picture of changes you've made to show off the most professional version of you. So it's pretty simple, 2 screenshots, and then email those to Sean@Keyot.com by August 14th for a chance to win a $50 gift card. I don't know about you all, but I could always go for a $50 gift card, especially for something as easy as 2 pictures. So we'd love for you to participate and be a part of that. We also encourage you to follow Keyot on social media, especially LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you enjoyed today's event, we do host live from the Keyot Café every month, and our next event will be on September 8th, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you again for joining us for today's newscast.
Thanks, everyone.